everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom or Tom. How's it going?
Tony, I love to tell the listeners when something is your fault, which happens so often. But today, Tony, I get a chance to do something that almost never happens, which is to tell the listeners when something is my fault. And if you're wondering, hey, why hasn't there been a Buckeye Weekly already this week? And that's on me. I had a couple extra days in D.C. for unrelated to Buckeyes reasons. So after the White House visit, I was out of town and occupado for a couple of days. So now I'm finally back. We'll get you a couple Buckeye Weeklies this week. So sorry for the delay. We normal service should resume shortly.
And Tom, you would not believe the number of people I had asking me, "Where's Tom? Where's Tom?" Do you want to know that number, Tom?
Did I win the Block O? Was that it?
No, I don't want to go there. But yeah, we do have we got some listener questions that we want to tackle, and this will allow us also to recap some of the entire spring camp that we saw and that we heard about. So that's what we'll be doing today. And Tom, let's just get right into it. Enough banter. Let's just go.
All right, let's start with one from @Buckeye_Gaddy. Which guys have been the most impressive offensive linemen, not named, Daniels, Onionwa, Hinsman, Tegra, Montgomery, or Siereveld?
Tom, I think there's probably two that we can mention here, and I'll take one, and that's the first guy that is not mentioned that I thought of is Ian Moore, who is worked with the ones at both left tackle and right tackles, also worked in the twos at both left tackle and right tackle. So he is going to be in that two deep somewhere. And we've talked about him a lot, how had a good freshman season, got better and better. And it's always surprising when a true freshman can work his way into the two deep. Being a sophomore, I don't know if he's a redshirt freshman or a sophomore at this point. I guess I can look really quickly. But as a second-year guy, to be in this position where he's been with the ones, he's been with the twos, he's comfortable doing that. Yes, redshirt freshman, and is going to compete for a job in the fall. Unfortunately for him, I think he's going to be competing with Austin Siereveld at right tackle. And so that's probably not going to go great for him, or it's not going to go well enough for him. I expect Austin Siereveld to win the job, but he's a guy that I think they believe they'll be able to turn to if need be, whether it's left tackle or right tackle.
Yeah, I think he's someone who is right in that mix for playing time already and was clearly climbing that ladder last year. I think that may have led to some of the portal departures that you saw. Ian Moore kind of jumping, even as a true freshman, jumping some guys who'd been there a few years on the depth chart by the time the end of the season rolled around. That was really intriguing to me and impressive to me, because that's just not a spot where you typically see true freshmen really kind of making a move. So when you see that early, that really kind of jumps out to me. You mentioned two names. That was certainly the first one that jumped out to me. I am curious who your second person is.
That's Jake Cook.
Okay.
True freshman from Westerville, who was working with the twos at left guard kind of out of nowhere because he's one of the lower ranked guys in the class. So you figure, well, we know offensive line is a developmental position, so you almost just ignore Jake Cook this year. And then you get out there and you watch practice and you're like, who's the 76 with the twos? And you go get your old trusty roster and it's like, oh, okay, that's Jake Cook. Interesting. Well, that's certainly noteworthy. So I think that was the other guy that jumped to my mind.
Yeah, and I think that's a good choice. And I certainly don't think he's someone who is the third guard in there by any means. But if you're even in that fourth guard, or you're in with the twos because the third guard might be Austin Siereveld, and you put Ian Moore in at right tackle or something like that, or Philip Daniels or whoever it is, I think that's impressive that you're just in that conversation this early. And again, like, that is not something you expect from a true freshman. So when you see it, and especially see it this early in the spring, that's something you just kind of go, okay, and just kind of make a note of it. Not expecting a start this year by any means for him, but you never expect that from a true freshman offensive lineman. So yeah, for him to be in that mix as early as he was, that definitely was impressive. Next one from @SPathfinder1. Which quarterback performed better this spring? It seems like Kienholz has the edge for now. And this one came in before the spring game. And I think you look at the spring game and Julian Sayin probably had a better spring game. This one might have even come in before that last practice, the Friday practice that we saw, where Kienholz had, certainly had the better start to the day, and then Sayin probably had the better finish to the day. And then in the spring game itself, I would say Sayin probably had the better start to the day, and Kienholz had the better finish to the day. I think it's pretty close, and I don't know that there was a clear cut, this guy is absolutely head and shoulders above and everyone else. I think I'm still sort of assuming it's going to be Julian Sayin until I see something otherwise. But just in terms of performance overall, they both had pros, they both had cons. I don't think and either of them has clearly, I don't think either of them has clearly won the job in the way that the coaching staff looks at it, which is which guy is good enough to get you to where your goals are, get you to where you want to be this fall. And I don't think right now either of them is there yet. You obviously have the whole summer, you got preseason camp, so there's plenty of time to get there. I don't think either of them is there yet. And I do think it was very close between the two of them at times, just if you were going to grade them out, I don't know, or is one a B and one's a B minus, or a B and a B plus, something like that. Neither was terrible, neither was amazing. They were both pretty good for stretches, and then you'd see a mistake and go, oh, that they're not going to like watching that film back later. But I think I'd give the slight edge to Sayin. But again, this is, there is stuff that Lincoln Kienholz does and Lincoln Kienholz has in terms of size, for example, where Ryan Day talked about that after the spring game. Julian Sayin is just not as tall as Lincoln Kienholz, and so then you get some passes batted down. If your elbow's not up enough, he talked about that in the post-game press conference a little bit. There's certainly stuff to like about both of them. I will go Julian Sayin by a small margin right now. What about you?
Yeah, I think neither one of them has done anything to win the job. Maybe more importantly, or just as importantly, neither one of them has done anything to lose the job, as the process is just ongoing. I assume it's going to be Julian Sayin, and that's, if you were to take away the recruiting rankings and everything we've heard, and you just look at what we've seen this spring, I don't know that I would have any idea of or anybody to pick. Now, the spring game was an eye opener because as we said after the spring game, you kind of got everything you'd been told about Julian, you finally saw. Now, if I were to go back and rewatch the second half of that and be like, well, this is where Lincoln stood out. I think it was like 5 for 5 or whatever, and Julian was not. Like, if you go back and overanalyze the spring game, does that change your mind? I just wonder where people would be, where we would be, the people on the outside would be, if we didn't come in with this assumption of, it's probably going to be Julian. And then you have Denzel Burke saying it, you have Emeka Egbuka, Lathan Ransom, all those guys at the NFL Combine saying all of these glowing things about Julian Sayin, and then maybe one or two of them is like, oh, and Lincoln's also good. Yeah, Lincoln is also on the team. Don't forget about him. And so I think what we saw from them is that one guy was better one day, the other guy was better the next day, and sometimes this guy was better for the first half of practice, sometimes this guy was better for the second half. So until they get that consistency, I don't know that I have an edge for either one of them. It's just my pre-spring assumption. It's my assumption since Julian Sayin transferred to Ohio State that eventually he will be the starter. And nothing I've seen to this point changes my mind, because we haven't seen Lincoln Kienholz be as consistent as you'd like to see your quarterback be. But also Will Howard wasn't as consistent in the spring as he needed to be in the regular season. So I think it's still up in the air, but I'm not going off of my initial pick.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that if you were just coming in cold and had never seen or talked to anyone about any of this, and you didn't have any idea of the recruiting rankings, and you hadn't talked to folks around the program before, I don't know that you necessarily would have been able to tell the difference between the two guys. And hey, this is the guy who everyone seems to think is going to be the starter. It's a lot like there's an old saying that, the difference between being like a 270 hitter in baseball and a 300 hitter is like 1 hit a week or 2 hits a week. And if you're just watching games and not being provided stats, you would really not be able to tell the difference between a 270 hitter and a 300 hitter. That kind of feels like how it was this spring, where if you hadn't been provided contextual information, you probably would kind of go, I don't know. I mean, they're tied. And I think that's a fair way to look at it. And it's probably, there probably is a little bit of confirmation bias in this for both of us. Just that's sort of human nature, that you've been told to expect this, so that when you see it, you're like, oh, there it is. There's the thing I was told to expect. And then when you see something that goes against that, it's like, well, that was a nice play, but it was just one play. And so you're sort of tempted to, maybe a little more tempted to dismiss something that doesn't kind of conform to your priors, basically. So yeah, I think that the way guys who have been around the program for as long as, Emeka Ibuka and Denzel Burke and all those guys who've been around the program and seen all the practices that we were not at. We saw 5 practices this spring and not even full practices in a couple cases. There are guys who were there for the whole year last year. There are guys who were there probably around the program some this spring who probably have seen more than we have. And they're all kind of saying the same basic thing, which is sort of what leads me to sort of think, yeah, I didn't see anything to dissuade me from thinking that. So, until further notice, that's kind of, say Julian Sayin has an edge, but neither one has won the job. There have been years where it's kind of like, yeah, okay, you come out of spring like, oh, still anyone's job. It's like, yeah, okay, sure. I will tell you what, I will bet you whatever amount you want that I can tell you who the starting quarterback is. This year, I don't feel that coming out of the spring. It feels like it's a little more up in the air. But as you said, you can look at past springs, what quarterbacks have looked like in the spring, and very rarely is a guy truly mid-season playoff ready in the spring. That's just not, especially as a first-year starter, that's just not how it works. There's just so much development that goes on throughout the year. Next one from @RealWalter_. I really feel there are question marks about the defensive line, particularly the ends. Will Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson live up to the hype? I think maybe the first thing, Tony, I would kind of raise an eyebrow at is particularly the ends. That's not really where I have my question marks about the defensive line.
Yeah, but I would agree that there are question marks about the defensive ends. And when we talk about the too deep of the defense, where it's like, boy, there's concerns all over the defensive line because your backups are, at this point, CJ Hicks and Logan George. CJ Hicks is a senior now, playing his first year as a defensive end, so it's going to take some time for him. Logan George coming up from Idaho State, he's a 4th-year guy, but it's still going to take some time for him to transition to Big Ten football. And then we just kind of ignore that Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry are going to be okay when they've never been asked to do this. They've never been starters. They've never had to play 40 snaps. They've never had to set the tone for a game right away. And you look in their career, they've got a combined 7.5 sacks over their 6 years on the field now. And so I do think there are question marks. I would agree with you, like particularly the ends, no. Particularly the defensive tackles. That's where the larger concern is. But overall, I do think there are question marks. We know that Ohio State's going to be hosting North Carolina defensive end Bo Atkinson here in the next week or so. He's one of the top guys in the portal, 6'6", 265. Led North Carolina with, I think, 12 tackles for loss and 7.5 sacks last year. So that could be something that he's also visiting Georgia, as is every other defensive lineman in the portal of any kind of worth. So clearly Ohio State is looking at defensive end. They need to look at defensive tackle again. But looking at the lists right now, there are more defensive ends in the portal that are worth the effort than there are defensive tackles. But I think until they prove it, then there will be questions for those two. However, on the list of concerns, I don't know, are they near the top? Because there's a lot of talent on this team. So maybe the concern, they're top half, but I don't know where necessarily. That's a different show, Tom. where we measure the concern level of all of the positions and players.
Yeah, there's a Mets podcast I listen to that does a recurring segment that's the panic city meter, and it's like 1 to 5, exactly how badly should you be panicking? And it's a Mets podcast, so the answer's never lower than about 4. But for Ohio State, it feels like if you're going to do panic city on a rank of 1 to 5, I think whatever the highest number you're going to assign is probably going to be defensive tackle, and particularly defensive tackle depth. Like, you feel pretty good about the starters there. You probably feel better about the starters at tackle, and then better about the depth at defensive end. But there's, neither the starters at defensive end are, a definite problem, nor is the depth at defensive end, a definite answer. It's just kind of, you probably on average feel better about the defensive ends than you do about the tackles. That really, though, really is about the depth at defensive tackle. It feels to me like Kenyatta Jackson is maybe more, I feel like Kenyatta Jackson may be less of a question mark to me than Caden Curry. And I don't know if that's based on anything real. It just sort of felt like he was kind of ahead of Caden Curry a decent amount last year, and maybe a little bit more productive, and was in the backfield a little more, whether or not he actually got to the quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I don't know if that's based on real, actual hard data, and if the data would really match up with that. That just, to me, it feels like you have a better sense for exactly what you're getting out of Kenyatta Jackson this fall than Caden Curry. And Logan George and CJ Hicks, as you said, tons of potential. You saw Logan George look impressive at times in the spring game. We saw Logan George look impressive at times during practice when we got to see him. How much is that really going to carry over this fall? We'll see. He's probably got some more development to do in CJ Hicks. You saw plenty of flashes from CJ Hicks. He's still just learning the position. There's probably going to be a little bit of a learning curve there. How quickly can he pick all that stuff up? The ceiling on CJ Hicks might be higher than anyone else in terms of, if it all comes together, it might look incredible this year, but you just don't know how much it's going to come together there. So, and then depth of defensive tackle, it just feels like we came into the spring thinking, well, they're going to have to figure that out. And very clearly at the end of spring, Ryan Day all but said, yeah, we haven't figured it out. We're going to have to figure something out. And that probably means finding someone in the portal. The portal, as we're recording this, has only been open for about a day and a little bit. So there's plenty more time for someone else to get in the portal. I'm sure Ryan Day, during the post spring interviews and during some of the interviews during the spring, where he was talking about the fact they're going to be looking, I'm sure lots of folks around the country heard that and are aware that there is a job opening. There's a help wanted sign in the defensive line room at Ohio State. So if they want to get their resumes together, there is probably a position available for them.
Well, real quick, Tom, on the Kenyatta Jackson, Caden Curry thing, I'll say, in the playoffs, Kenyatta Jackson played about twice as many snaps than Caden Curry. It was like 78 to 41. And over the course of the season, 314 snaps for Kenyatta Jackson, 229 for Caden Curry. So I think it is interesting that Kenyatta Jackson played nearly 20 snaps a game in the playoffs. And that gives you a pretty good indication of how they feel about him. You would like to see more production, and he's going to have obviously more opportunity to do that this year. So I'm with you. Like, I think the expectations are very high for him, and I don't think those are without grounds. And the expectations are high for Caden Curry, and and his limited opportunities, he's done well also. So I think it's okay to assume they're going to be fine, but just recognize that these are assumptions.
Yeah. And there's, the talent is there. You've sort of seen it, and it's just, can you go from a part-time to we'll go back to the employment thing. Can you go from a part-time job to a full-time job, or a regular job to a management job? You're getting the promotion is there for you if you're ready to take it, and we will see exactly how much he can he earn that promotion this fall. So next one, we have this is a three-headed monster here, all about the tight ends. We're going to combine all of these together from at S Pathfinder 1. Do you think Heartline will call more pass plays to emphasize the tight ends? From at John C. Agronomy, boy, that's an awesome name if that's a real name. Do you think tight end involvement in the passing game will be more or less than last year? And from that, David Hoosier 1, with what you've seen / heard so far, is this actually the year of the tight end? The room is as deep as I can remember. So starting with the last one, yes, obviously it's the year of the tight end. This is never, now more than ever, 2025, the year of the tight end. This is the deepest room I can ever remember Ohio State having. This is probably not only the deepest room that I can remember Ohio State having, this is probably the deepest room in the country. I mean, maybe, we'll see when the preview magazines come out, when they do the positional rankings, do they rank Ohio State as the number one tight end room in the country? I think you've got a real possibility of them being number one, number two, something like that. And it's not just you got a bunch of good players. You've got a bunch of players who can do all sorts of different stuff. You got Max Clare, who transferred from Purdue and had 600 yards receiving last year, and who's probably not going to put up those kind of numbers this year. But man, you saw in the spring game, he only had a couple catches, but you saw he split out, get him out in the open field, creates all sorts of mismatches, had a nice tight touchdown in the spring game. And that feels like that's going to be really his role. Will Kazmarek, you saw, I think everyone has sort of come to appreciate what Will Kazmarek can do. This time last year, we were talking about, well, they brought him in because they really think he's a good blocker, and he missed a bunch of time with that broken arm after the Oregon game. But man, when he was in there, you saw him and you really felt him in that run game and even in the pass game, blocking out in space, blocking on the edge. He was a really, really a difference maker for them when he was healthy and on the field last year. I think you're going to see more from him. And then you got the two guys, before we even get to the young guys, the two guys who are sort of coming back, who are the knocking on the door kind of guys, and that's Bennett Christian and Jelani Thurman. Both of those guys were sort of making strides last year, taking on bigger roles last year, and earning playing time in a room where it was not, you were not just sort of getting handed playing time by default. There was a lot there that you had to really climb over, because you had Will Kazmarek out with a broken arm, but G. Scott was clearly tight end 1 last year for them. And if you didn't have two tight ends who they really felt they could play, guess what? There are always more wide receivers you can put on the field. So if they're playing a couple tight ends, you're really earning your role. And I don't know if you have the snap counts pulled up, but Bennett Christian and Jelani Thurman both felt like you saw more of Bennett Christian kind of throughout the season, and then it feels like we saw more of Jelani Thurman throughout the spring this year. So again, that's just your top 4, and there's a couple more. There's 3 more guys in that room that I haven't even talked about yet, including one who's not here yet, Brody Lennon, who doesn't show up until the summer. But you're looking at potentially 7 tight ends there, and how many can you really play? 4 in any kind of meaningful way? That's a real good 4, and then you got 3 more guys behind them.
Yeah, you said a lot there, Tom. There's a lot of reason for the high expectations for the tight ends this year. And in terms of John C. Agronomy's question, will the tight end involvement in the passing game be more or less than last year? I think you're going to see teams see what Texas did to Jeremiah Smith and try to emulate that. Now, what that led to was G. Scott having sets a career high with 5 receptions. Will Kazmarek set his season high with 2 receptions. So there are seven catches by the tight ends, just those 2 tight ends in that game, because there's so much attention. Well, not because, but there's a bunch of attention on Jeremiah Smith. And also in the same game, whether unrelated or very related, there were 7 catches for the tight ends. So are they going to be more involved? I think people forget how involved Kate Stover was in 2023, where he had, 40-some catches or whatever. And I think you can see that. Is that a good target for Max Clare to shoot for? Because, I don't think he's going to get his 50-some, 51 catches or 58, whatever he had last year. But Kate Stover had 41 catches. I even feel like that would be a lot for Max Clare in this offense when he's one of 5 or 6 tight ends. And just to remind people, 5 tight ends played in the national championship game for Ohio State. And so Keenan Bailey is going to play a lot of guys, and all of the guys that are back are a year better and more capable of playing. But if there's a lot of attention on Jeremiah Smith, and I suspect that there will be, and there's attention going to need to be placed on the other receivers as well, then I think there could be more involvement for the tight ends in the passing game this year. They didn't go get Max Clare not to use him, basically. I'd say that. And then will Brian Hartline call more pass plays to emphasize the tight ends? I don't think that will have anything to do with their game plans. It's going to be, what can your quarterbacks do? What's the running game look like? What does the offensive line look like? Who are you playing against? And what are they taking away from you? And once you figure out what they're taking away from you, or they're trying to take away from you, and what they're giving up, then that's where the offense kind of leads.
Yeah, it a little bit like, do you try and take away Michael Jordan and make the other of guys on the 96 Bulls beat you, or are you trying to take away the other guys and you just say, well, Michael Jordan's going to do what Michael Jordan wants to do? It feels like teams towards the end of the year were trying to take away Jeremiah Smith. And as you said, you saw that sort of trickle down where Ohio State kind of went, okay, and then threw to some other people, because they, this is not a one-trick pony thing. No disrespect to Purdue's wide receivers last year, but Max Clare was pretty clearly the best, the best weapon on that Purdue offense. Max Clare is not going to be the best weapon on this Ohio State offense, but he's going to probably be creating all sorts of mismatches, and you're certainly not getting double teamed as a tight end if you've got Jeremiah Smith outside, and you've got Carnell Tate outside, and you've got Brandon Innes, and you've got James Peoples, and there are so many weapons on this team that, you can decide, okay, we're going to bracket this one guy. You can't bracket everyone. I can do the math for you. If you try and bracket 5 different receivers, well, you're going to give up about 9,000 yards worth of quarterback draws this year. That's really going to open things up quite a bit in the quarterback run game. So that's probably not going to be how teams decide to defend the Buckeyes. But you think not only the numbers that you said there in terms of the tight ends' impact in those big games towards the end of the season, think about some of the plays. The first play of the game to G. Scott and the Rose Bowl, where they just kind of schemed him open, and he had, a 25, 30-yard reception right off the bat, and that really got Ohio State rolling right out of the gate. But he was also in that Cotton Bowl game. You mentioned the 7 catches. One of the least exciting plays there was one that was one of the biggest, where he really it was 3rd and 8 or something like that. And he fought through a couple different tackles. He caught like a drag route over the middle, broke a couple tackles, kind of fought, dragged some guys, and got it to a 4th and manageable that then they converted. And I think that was the 3rd touchdown drive for Ohio State. And that was an enormous play. That was one of those plays where if you don't make it, the whole game and potentially the whole season changes. And you don't have to have enormous numbers to be a super, super impactful tight end. It's going to be a bunch of the little stuff, the small gains. I'm not expecting a 225-yard game from Max Clare this year, but boy, you could see him catching a really crucial touchdown pass here, or, a really important 4th down conversion. Jelani Thurman against Penn State had that 4th and 1 where he caught the pass about 4 different times. But, those tight ends, they're not necessarily going to do stuff, massive volume, but you could really see the impact if you're kind of looking on a real minutia kind of play-to-play kind of level.
For sure. And when we looked at Bennett Christian last year, he played 235 snaps compared to 165 for Jelani Thurman. So he kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, we knew where he was, but he surprised everybody by he was behind Thurman for about the first month of the season, and then he was gone. Like he had moved ahead of him, and he played double figure snaps in all but I think 3 games last year. And so he was a large part of the offense. I do wonder how Max Clare's presence will impact everybody else in terms of their numbers and their stats, or their snaps. But, G. Scott was playing, he played 548 snaps over 16 games. What's that, like 30, 35 snaps a game or so. And so those just go to Max Clare, and then maybe a few more go to Max Clare. But I do think they're going to play a lot of 12 personnel, because if Keenan Bailey is calling Will Kazmarek the best run blocking tight end in the nation, he's going to be out there for a lot of that. So that will do it for us. We still have some more listener questions to go. We'll get those done for you for the next episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up. We would appreciate that. And if you're listening on any podcast platform of choice, a 5-star rating and review would certainly help us as well. And of course, also find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com, where we are there. You can see us. We're covering the team. Tom just got back from Washington, D.C. as well. Photos from that trip you can find there at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And of course, talking about all of it there at the Buckeye Huddle message board presented by Jeff Ruby's Columbus. So thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys later.